Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for another That's Wild, Tales from the Human Side of Nature. My name is Mike Skargland, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. What is That's Wild? Well, a quick reminder, it's a monthly storytelling event series in which people from all walks of life tell their tales of their experiences in and with nature. In other words, how the wild spaces outside of us affect the spaces inside of us. And of course, the stories featured on That's Wild reflect the people that tell them, meaning that they can be very different from month to month, but it's important to remember they're all authentic. How can you at home watching interact with That's Wild and our storyteller tonight? Well, that's easy. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little Q&A button. And if at any time you'd like to ask the storyteller a question, click that button and type your question into the box that appears, and your question will be collected during the story, and it may be selected to be asked during the Q&A session once the story has finished. A couple of other housekeeping notes. Please note that this event is being recorded for later distribution on YouTube, and that the chat functionality in Zoom has been disabled for this evening. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our tale teller tonight. In a long and distinguished educational career, Dr. Ismael Calderon has dedicated himself to bringing the wonders of nature and science to the people of our region, serving as the Director of Science of the Newark Museum, Assistant Chair of the American Museum of Natural History's Education Department, a panelist for the National Science Foundation, as well as being on New Jersey Audubon's board for 16 years. Over the course of his career, and based on his encyclopedic knowledge of STEAM curricula, that's science, technology, engineering, art, and math, Dr. Calderon developed and produced a myriad of programs, exhibits, events, initiatives that brought important natural and scientific topics to a huge range of diverse audiences and families. And he was very, very good at it. He developed, for example, the American Museum of Natural History's 125th anniversary signature event, Celebrate 125, which drew 100,000 people in one day. Dr. Calderon has a Bachelor of Science degree from Fordham University and Master of Arts and Master of Science degrees in Science Education from Columbia University Teachers College, and he completed his Doctor of Education degree from Columbia University Teachers College in 1998. His story tonight is called Shaped by Nature, Reflections of a Career in Science. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Ismael Calderon.
Thank you, Mike. That was a very wonderful introduction. Really appreciate that. The story that I'm about to tell starts about 65 years back. As the title of the series indicates, it's about how nature has affected you and made the person that you are. So I would have to start back, like I said, 65 years ago when I was running around in Puerto Rico. So I was born in a place called Jagüeyes, Puerto Rico. And this is a mountainous area, coffee fields in Puerto Rico. My family were farmers. I'm the last of 15 kids, so that was quite an adventure. But having been born in Puerto Rico in the mountainous area 65 years ago, it was a different environment than it is in the urban environment that we're in today. I was basically in a natural playground. My games consisted every day of going out and looking for different types of animals that inhabited my environment of Jagüeyes. Of particular were birds. I love birds ever since I was about 5 years old, when I would be chasing them throughout the mountainside of Puerto Rico, looking to see where they would hide their eggs. I would be just in awe and wonder about how birds proceeded with their daily lives, how they flew. I was amazed at their beautiful colors. In Puerto Rico, you had a wonderful series of birds, a lot of different species that inhabited the countryside there. And I was just in awe of them, and was curious to see what they were doing all the time. As you may know, the outdoors basically serves as a natural giant laboratory for young people, and it's a wonderful space to explore and be a young scientist. So, in a sense, growing up in Puerto Rico, I was exactly that, a scientist. Not only was I becoming somewhat of a bird watcher, but an ornithologist in terms of learning the behavior of birds. I was also in the countryside in my home of Puerto Rico. We had we were living in a one house, 15 kids and mother and father. So it was quite different again from the world we know today. There was no plumbing, there was no water. Through plumbing, there was no electricity. So it was quite a different environment as we know it in this country. We would go over to the river where we would play and have a great time. But I was always very curious to see what was in the river. In the river, I would look for a fresh shrimp, which we had in basically fished out of the water to eat. We also were able to look for, or I did look for, a freshwater crab, which we call a buruquena, so that I would go and basically look through the rocks, lift up rocks and see where we can find them. And those that I found, we could actually consume as food during the evening. So that was a wonderful thing to do. The countryside basically was full of a lot of nature. It was all around us. So there was no way that I could avoid it. And I was just infatuated with my environment. At night, when you went to sleep, you heard the wonderful calls of a small little frog called a coqui. And that frog basically is named after its mating and territorial call. Ko-ki, ko is the sound that it makes basically to establish a territory and keep away intruders or other rivals. The key basically is for to attract the female. It was, you hear this chorus in Puerto Rico of the coqui throughout the area. At night when the coqui came out, you also would look up and you had a natural planetarium. I mean, it was just wonderful looking up and looking at the Milky Way. In Puerto Rico, in terms of the birds, I was particularly very interested in the hummingbirds, because hummingbirds have beautiful feathers. They have a beautiful flight pattern, and they were so small and intricate, so they were fascinating to look at. There was a particular bird that we looked at called el zumbador, and that means a hummingbird in Spanish. So I would try to track them down and see what they were doing throughout in Puerto Rico. Now, this was life in Puerto Rico. Was like living in a in Shangri-La. It was basically living in an environment that was just a wonderful place for a young person like myself to explore. As you may know, during this period of life, about 0 to 5 and 5 to 10 is when our brain is developing and when we start making a lot of connections with the natural world. And it's a period of time where we are learning and establishing our thought processes, how we process information, so on and so forth. Then at about the age of 5 years old, something strange happened. My family moved to the United States. And so I was basically transplanted from that wonderful environment in Puerto Rico to what we call the neighborhood Spanish Harlem in New York City. And I remember the day that we took the plane from Puerto Rico, basically landing at that time it was called Idlewild Airport, which is now Kennedy Airport. And so it was just a different experience. Here I was in a natural environment, suburban environment, and I'm thrusted into a city, urban environment. The smells were different. The total venue, the entire environment was quite different in terms of how it made me feel. I can remember coming into the neighborhood that I was going to live in, and basically smelling the asphalt. The first gum that I took was bazooka gum, I remember, very sweet. So everything is very different. Now, living in Puerto Rico, I have been tasting, you know, as a young kid, the soil. I've been tasting the plants. And this is how kids explore. So I was doing this. The exploration in New York City was a little different. Although we settled in 110th Street between Madison and Fifth Avenue, across the street from Central Park. Central Park was actually a prohibited place for us to visit because our parents didn't know what was happening there. They were not familiar with the environment. So although we had this in our backyard, I was not an area that I could explore. So moving from a very outdoors type of environment to an environment now that's very enclosed. So you basically were living in this box. And from there, from that box, I basically went from home to school, and there was very little exploration, and this is not the life that I was used to. So I had these challenges in front of me. Not only the environment was different, the kinds of things that I was accustomed to doing were different, but I also had a challenge with the language. Being monolingual Spanish, I came into a school system that was monolingual English. So the first, I would say from the first through the sixth grade, it was basically a wash in terms of what I was learning in school. Very difficult times. I did not like going to school at all, simply because I was not doing the kinds of things that I liked, the types of explorations I was doing in Puerto Rico. So in school basically was a lot of book learning instead of the learning that I was doing by myself outside and with my sibling by exploring the natural environment. And the wonder that was out there, I did not find it in the schools that I was attending at that particular time. There are two episodes that I can recall in school that were fairly positive, and that was maybe the monthly visit that we had from a science instructor that used to come and teach us maybe once a month, maybe every other month. And I remember the name of the instructor was Miss Greenstock, a wonderful name for a science instructor. So Miss Greenstock would come in and teach us. I remember her teaching us about centripetal and centrifugal force with the bucket. That's always stuck in my mind. I was fascinated with scientific phenomena. And then we also were able to, in the sixth grade, get into the play Alice in Wonderland, and we ended up reading the book, constructing the stage set and the costumes, and performing the play for the entire school system and others schools that came in to see the play. So it was a wonderful experience. But basically, I was not too much into school. Nature had basically, I had basically abandoned nature because I was not allowed to enter it, as you may. Then I entered junior high school, and in junior high school, something interesting happened there in terms of the fact that during that period of time, they had a track system. So when you wanted to into junior high school, you either went to class 7-1 or 7-15, depending how you were evaluated as a student. Unfortunately, I was, because of the language barrier and not performing well in the elementary grade levels, I was in 7-7. So I was basically a mediocre student according to the school system. But every time we went to the assembly program, I would notice that the students that were getting all the real cool things to do, that they had the really wonderful field trips and doing great things, that were in class 7-1. And so I decided, after observing that, I don't know where I got the goal to actually ask the teacher, or the nerve to ask the teacher if I could be in that class. And she looked at me strangely and said, and that was my teacher, Miss Goodwin, again, remember her name. And I asked Miss Goodwin, is it possible to get into that class? And she said, well, let's see. So she spoke to the assistant principal, and they ended up giving me a challenge. And the challenge was, if you take this history book and you read some of the chapters and answer some of the questions at the end of the chapters, see how many you can do and come back to us with that. So I went home, I took the book, started reading. And after a few days, I realized that there was a structure to the book. It's, if you may, it had a certain system, so that if you read the book in a certain sequence, you could actually match the questions in the back with the answers that you could find in the book. So I did that. I brought it back to the school, and they, lo and behold, they thought that I had something on the ball. They were just more marveling at the fact that I had done so many of the chapters. I practically did the entire book, to be quite frank. So that put me in class 7-1, and then from there, a teacher started taking an interest in me, and I attribute basically that activity, that phenomenon during that period of time, to the fact that I had developed some skills of analysis, some skills of questioning, some of the skills that we call the science process, and not knowing that's what you would call it. And then during the same period of time, I let me go back a little bit. During in the 7th grade, the teacher gave us then also an assignment to go and take a book out during the Thanksgiving holiday, to go out and read a book and report back on it. I went to the local library, could not find a book that interested me right away. So I looked at a few books, and one had a nice cover that I liked. I said, so let me take this one. Title of it was The Origins of Species. And The Origins of Species basically did not understand totally what was in there, but it piqued my mind. And I started reading, and grabbing some of the ideas, and I thought they were quite interesting. So that was an interesting period in my life where I started sort of figuring out what the system was. And from there, I then was an opportunity to go then into high school. I had by this time done very well in school. I was then an A student, and I was counseled by my teachers to determine whether or not I was going to go to one of the elite schools like Science High, Bronx High School of Science, or Brooklyn Tech, or Stuyvesant, or one of the elite Catholic schools. And what they said, did your parents, or do your parents have money to put you through college? And I said no. So they said they advised me, they counseled me to go to a special program at a school in 18th Street called the School of the Humanities. I attended that school. They had wonderful teachers, great teachers for students that were interested in, that were motivated, that were interested in learning. And so I attended the school, ended up doing well, and went into college. As you mentioned, I attended Fordham University. Again, I still have been in many ways sort of divorced from activities with nature. So I ended up attending Fordham University, and again, Fordham University was a sort of a repeat of everything that I had done in high school. So I did not find it very stimulating. I was bored, frankly, most of the time. And only perhaps a few classes like bacteriology, at that time it was not cell biology, histology. And so those were a few of the classes, but other than that, I was not too keen on the other classes. I was a pre-med student and did not fare well enough to get into medical school. So when I graduated Fordham University in 1974, I ended up driving a yellow cab in New York City, which I was doing throughout the 4 years that I attended Fordham University. I ended up for 1 year from 1973 to 74, driving a yellow cab. And some of you may know that during that period of time, there was a recession happening throughout the United States. We had these long gas lines. So there were very few jobs throughout. I could not find a job in the field of biology. I was pretty frustrated. And then one day in June of 1974, I decided to take matters into my hands more aggressively. And I decided, because I just could not take it anymore. I remember driving the cab. There was, at that time, the taxi cabs did not have air conditioning. Traffic in New York City was horrendous. So it was brutal to be involved in that type of work. So, and I said to myself, somebody in this city has to have a job for a bilingual Latino with a biology degree. So I decided to start looking around and seeing what was available. And I ended up, because of serendipity or happenstance, to stop at the American Museum of Natural History, and simply because they had a parking stand for cab drivers. And I ended up parking there, going up to the department, the Human Resources Department, which they called personnel at that time. And there was a job listed as a job for a bilingual science instructor with an understanding of the Caribbean. And I said, wow, this is me. And they were about to close the job down because they could not find the individual to fill that position with those credentials. And so I ended up going up to the department, applying, and the director of the department asked me to go back home and maybe put on a tie and a jacket and come back. And they were going to close the job that same day because they could not find anyone. So it would behoove me to come back and have an interview on that same day. So I ended up coming back to the museum, get interviewed by about 5 people at the same time. They pretty much had given up already as to whether or not they can fill the position. So I strolled in and I had the interview. And I had quite a successful interview. I was able to survive if you made the gauntlet with all those people interviewing me at once. And in the evening when I get home, I get a call from the director of the department, and he asked whether or not I was interested in the job. Was I really interested? I said, sorry, I am interested. So he says, when do you want to start? I said, tomorrow. So the next day I show up, and here I am at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And to be quite frank, as a young child, I hated going to museums because it was not a very rewarding experience. They would put you in a line with a partner in your class, and you would walk in a 2x2 throughout the exhibit. And I remember going up to the mastodons and not really getting anything out of it. It was not very interesting for me. So that was quite of a challenge. So I said to myself, what am I going to do now that I did not like this museum, and now here I am teaching. So I'm not going to inflict the students with the same type of pain that was inflicted upon me when I went to the museum. So I had to become a little more creative. Now, the wonderful thing was that here now I'm at the American Museum of Natural History of a university replete with science. That's all they do, the science investigation, science research. You have the Department of Ornithology, you have the Department of Entomology, the Department of Mammalogy. So you had all these different departments, scientific departments doing research, top-notch research, all the resources you need to learn science. So I was in heaven, basically. Then being at the museum, I had opportunity to meet and converse and interact with these individuals, scientists, renowned scientists throughout the world, and learning from them. So I had opportunity to be mentored by some of the very best out there. Basically, students, when they're in school, especially during that period of time, when they're asked, what do you want to do with your career? You ask, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something of that nature. You did not ever think of having a career in a museum, but the museum having employees of 500 people, mostly doing research in science. It's basically a natural science university. I was interacting with artists that were doing the wonderful dioramas of the museum, learning from them what they were doing, what kind of a few trips they had to go out and participate in, and basically what they had to learn to bring back and interpret what they were learning at the museum. I had the opportunity to meet my mentor, Ken Chambers, a wonderful English fellow who introduced me to the natural world. He was a fabulous naturalist, and he basically gave me a lot of guidance into what natural parks to visit, and basically how to do a few research, because I was not used to doing any of this, and learn by being out there, and then taking that information, bringing it back to the museum and interpreting it for the audiences at the museum. And so that was quite interesting to be able to do that. One of the trips that he basically helped me with was a trip that I was able to take that to visit the parks on the eastern coast of the United States. So I basically started off in Massachusetts, in Cape Cod, and ended up all the way up going to Baxter State Park, Mount Katahdin, going up into Bonaventure Island, from Bonaventure Island to see the gannets up there, to back to New York, in the Adirondacks, and doing different types of activities in terms of identifying all manners of natural history, birds, insects, different types of flowers and trees. And then from those experiences, we were then supposed to develop talks and slide presentations from that. So it was a wonderful learning experience. So that was a very important part of my life, because it started bringing me back to nature, and learning that what was happening out in nature and how people were perceiving it. Then I had to bring this back into the classroom for visiting schools at the museum and other audiences, and make it come alive to them. So I had to then start creating, as I mentioned before, experiences that would be of interest to the public, but were not static. So I started concocting different types of lessons which we call inquiry-based science learning. Little did I know that this was going to become a phenomenon in the future, as museum interpretation museum exhibits are known. One of the very interesting encounters that I had was entering the museum. As I mentioned before, I'm meeting all these scientists. And I remember going back into Central Park in one of my trips with some of the museum scientists, the ornithologists from the Department of Ornithology, into Central Park, an area called the Ramble. And we had an interesting encounter going through 77th Street in a period or in during a time where it was replete with birds. An episode called The Fallout, if you may remember, some of you might have watched the Big Ear, where all these birds come down flying because of storms, and they're up in the atmosphere, and they need to find a place to hide and to shelter. So we had one of those at the I'd say we're about 1976 thereabouts. Anyway, going to Central Park, and golly, how many birds do we get to see? I remember seeing all kinds of warblers the first time I had seen warblers. So it reminded me very much of Puerto Rico. Beautiful coloration on them. My first indigo bunting, hawks. I mean, it was like a menagerie of birds. So that was a wonderful experience to have gone through. I at the museum, I got an education. I was also able to meet other scientists in other fields, such as Dr. Margaret Mead, and which was a very interesting experience, because Margaret Mead was like a goddess in terms of the field of anthropology, the study of other people and their cultures. And she was just an encyclopedia about people's culture. She was an encyclopedia able to interpret why they did the kinds of things they did, and really gave individuals from other cultures a lot of respect. And she was in the process of developing, together with the chairman of the education department, developing the presentation, the Margaret Mead Film Festival, which still goes on today, which is an ethnographic film festival featuring cultures from throughout the world, so that we in this culture here, in this part of the world, are able to understand why people in other cultures do what they do and have a better appreciation for them. So that was a wonderful education. So I spent 23 years at the Museum of Natural History, getting a fabulous education, creating programs with the resources that I had. And then I was recruited by the Newark Museum to develop their science department. Spending 23 years in an institution is quite difficult. To leave, that is, so it's difficult for me to say goodbye to the institution, but I thought the challenge at the museum, at the Newark Museum, was a good one. So I took the challenge, and my mission was to develop a science department using the tools that I had of inquiry-based science learning, hands-on learning, as we call it today, and engaging the public in inquiry-based learning at the museum. And during this period of time, I decided that it was important to get my doctorate degree, because in order to be involved in a lot of fields in science, especially in the museum level, you have to be able to play with those other individuals that have those degrees. Unfortunately, that's how life works. Sometimes I realized that early, that you need to have the proper credentials to be able to participate, especially for Latino. I mean, that once I got my doctorate degree, that opens a lot of doors, and I receive a lot of respect from the community to be able to participate. So now I'm at the Newark Museum. I'm back to nature, so I started developing programs that basically borrow from my experiences as a child in Puerto Rico, the scientific work that I considered that I was doing as a child in that wonderful laboratory of Agüeyes, Puerto Rico, where I was born, and developing programs there that would engage the public in outdoor and indoor programs using the museum's exhibits. One of the programs that I'm most proud of is the Explorers program, a program that engages students, and that is Newark students specifically in the outdoors, investigating the natural environments of New Jersey. And we would basically focus on one specific area, and that would be birding. And we would go out and use the science process of observing, questioning, hypothesizing, predicting, and interpreting and communicating all the information that we're learning by a simple activity such as bird watching. And it proved to be quite successful. The students were very much engaged in learning and interested in learning about science. And it shows that as children and young people learn to interact with the environment, they are more attentive, they're less stressed, so they want to learn more. And that I found that through the Science Explorers, we were able to do that. The Science Explorers would participate in such programs as the 24-hour birding experience that is sponsored by the New Jersey Audubon Society. They had a great time doing that activity. It's a wonderful learning experience. I was also able to develop an exhibit called Skies Alive, an exhibit that allowed people to interact with an interactive and basically learn about the 350 species that use the Atlantic Flyway as they migrate from the south to the north and north to the south every year in search of food. The one particular exhibit that we did, just to kind of talk about a little bit about the hands-on experiences that were necessary to engage people in the classroom, was an interactive where the individual would basically pretend they were a red knot leaving Tierra del Fuego, and they would have to maneuver through the environment to avoid a lot of the hazards that were out there. Everything from predators to storms to depletion of environments and things of that nature, so that they can actually see the challenges that migrating birds had to be able to appreciate and understand why it's so important to preserve New Jersey's environments. I don't think I would have been able to have done what I did and have met my challenges throughout my life if I had not had that experience in Puerto Rico as a young explorer, looking through the rocks, exploring my natural environments, being fascinated by the hummingbirds, looking at the Milky Way at night, and basically being in nature and understanding and appreciation what nature is about. So basically, as Mike said, the series is about nature and how it makes the individual a total product of how nature basically has produced an educator that has been able to share his experiences with the community to make them understand and appreciate the natural world and respect it a whole lot more. Thank you.
Dr. Calderon, thank you so much. That was a very, very wonderful story. It must be incredibly satisfying for you to look back on your career and your life and know that it has such meaning. I mean, I think the way you are able to tie it back to your early childhood, especially, I find very, very interesting.
It is. I mean, the satisfaction is it's incredible, especially because I come from a again, Latino background. I'm Puerto Rican, and being the first in my family from 15 kids to go into college, attend college and get a doctorate degree. That has been very satisfying because I basically am serving as a role model and as a mentor for the rest of my family, and not only to my family but the community, and to be able to share the knowledge that I've gained by interacting with other human beings, the knowledge that I've gained by attending university, and being able to direct other people to find careers, especially in the sciences and specifically in the natural sciences, has been an incredible reward for me. I know of some of my students that have gone on to get degrees in the field, and to attain professions that are rewarding to them as well, especially in the areas of medicine, where I've had a few students go into the field.
You paint such a wonderful picture of Puerto Rico in your childhood. I have sort of two questions based on that. I mean, first of all, do you ever get to go back? And secondly, do you miss it?
Well, I miss Puerto Rico a lot, so I do go up. I would say maybe every other year before the storm started with the climate change really attacking the island. So it's quite difficult now because of devastation that's taking place there. But prior to that, I was in the island perhaps every other year. I still have a lot of family there, and we actually still have the 25 acres of land that my parents had. So that's still part of the family. So you go back to visit that. So missing it, is there. I've gotten now acclimatized to the United States, and I know the environment here, so I'm able to visit all the wonderful resources that we have, all the great national parks and state parks that we have. So there's a lot to do here. The world that I've explored is quite fascinating. So I love the environment that I'm currently in, but I would not have loved it that much if I had not been exposed to those wonderful experiences in Puerto Rico. One of the things that I do now is I love doing bike riding in rails to trails, and basically going through the trails and spending time with myself. Excuse me.
Somebody wants to join in. They have questions for you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So the rails to trails, it allows me to explore locally. And I mean, I've had a few experiences where I've actually fallen down. One time I was riding my bike and I fell, and I look up and there was an owl looking down at me like, say, what are you doing down there? Things that happen are incredible, but I really enjoy it.
So obviously you've spent your professional career in the museum environments, and so I'm curious to know what you think museums need to do to flourish and survive going forward. I mean, we're living in a time of immense technological change. Of course, you've already alluded to it. There's climate change. What things do museums need to do to really continue to be relevant and meaningful in our society today?
That's a key question, and I think I was sort of making some reference when I first entered the museum, and I said that I found museums boring because they were not connecting to me. And I think what happens is, in some cases, museum professionals, or at least it was more so in the past, were not so much interested in understanding how people learn. So that I think what they need to do is sort of change that gestalt that they have, and understand that everybody learns differently, and you learn by interacting with things as we do in nature, and taking that understanding and bringing it into the museum environment. So making exhibits and experiences in the museum more interactive, making them more organic, and connecting them to the outdoors, because after all, what you're learning in museums, you have to take in the outdoors. So I think that's a key.
Right.
The other thing I think to make it more relevant um, is making them more diverse. One of the things that happened, when I was at the American Museum of Natural History, many times I was the only Latino, and in many cases, especially in the beginning years that I was at the museum, there was not a Black or Latino face in the conferences that I went to. They did not know what to make of me. I must say I was probably the highest professional working at the museum when I left of Latino background. And no one had reached the assistant chair position until I got to that position. So I think you need to diversify them. You need to make them more people friendly and conscious of how people learn. And that is why when I referred to Margaret Mead, and I thought she was a great inspiration to me, because she understood different cultures and the importance of appreciating the nuances of other cultures and why they do what they do, because we all see the world differently. And in the area that I study, we call that schema or schemata, and that's basically sort of a program that we have in our mind as to how the world operates, and we interpret the world accordingly. So museums need to start learning that concept and implementing it more in the design of museum experiences.
So we have a related question from the audience, which is, have museums diversified their staff since you started? I mean, is it getting better, or is it still leaving a lot to be desired?
Some museums have tried, but I mean, if you go and look at the internet and look at the staff of museums, and I'm not talking about the junior staff, because they've made some inroads there, but that's easy to do. But when it comes to the professional, upper level staff, very little change in many places. There are many, for instance, many urban museums that have a complete white staff, instead of having a diversified staff that represents the community and are able to bring that understanding into the museum. So there has been some movement in the area, and there's some really good organizations that are trying to make changes, but they still have a long way to go.
Right. So obviously you spent a lot of time in your career helping to introduce scientific concepts and nature to children, to younger people. Yes. If you had one thing to say to young people today that they need to know about in terms of the natural world, what is the number one scientific issue that you would think they need to know about and that you would want to tell them about and teach them about?
Well, I think the number one issue today is climate change. Basically, there's nothing else that's going to be left out there if we don't address the issue of climate change, understand why it's happening, get the facts as to why it's happening, understand how our world, our Earth changes and operates, and basically take care of the planet. We need a healthy ecological system, and without that healthy ecological system, we're not going to survive.
Right. Yes. It's. I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I mean, it's clear, isn't it? It is the number one agenda item for all of us.
And it's scary. I mean, one of the exhibits that I developed at the museum, hoping to address the issue that we're describing here, and at the Newark Museum, was called Dynamic Earth. And as having a biology degree, I really gain an appreciation for the geological sciences in terms of how the world is continually changing through the process of plate tectonic movement, and how those movements create different environments and different biomes to which animals and plants have to adapt to. And basically, if we're not understanding that whole process as to what nature changes, the way it changes, the process that is taking place, we are, you know, are not going to be able to do much to save the planet. So we have to basically get an understanding for how our globe, our Earth basically works. And then through the process, through that exhibit, we try to communicate that. So we talk about all the different types of animals that inhabit the planet, why extinction periods took place, why the environment is so fragile today, and the kinds of things that we need to do. So it's a difficult, you know, it's a difficult concept. I understand that, but you have to. People coming into museums only have a very short attention span and a very little time to basically learn what they're going to learn at the museum. So you have to create the environments that are, what I say, immersive, engaging, and basically directed at them, at their interests. It's very important.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to leave it. We're running out of time, but so unfortunately we have to say our goodbyes. But Dr. Ismael Calderon, thank you so much for sharing your inspirational story with us tonight. It was really wonderful. And I loved how it's all tied together from, you know, from the basis of your childhood. I think that's just, I think William Wordsworth said the child is father to the man. And I think you've just given an incredibly good example of how our early influences can actually continue to exert that influence in later life. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for having me and having the opportunity to tell my story.
You're quite welcome. And to everyone watching, thank you very much for being with us tonight and listening to Dr. Calderon's story. Good night to you all. Stay well and stay wild, and we'll see you next time on That's Wild, Tales from the Human Side of Nature. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.